Hello, welcome to the third workshop of the After Effects workshop series. I'm Robert Mahaffey, the Film and Media Paraprof, and today we're going to be working with masks and mats. So I'm going to show you what I made today, and then we'll get started. Okay, so let's get started. So today we're going to be covering a number of different topics. We're going to work on making basic shape masks. We're going to work on editing those mask shapes. And we're going to use mask parameters to change the way our masks function. We're also going to animate masks. We're going to do some freeform masking using pen tools. We're going to go over different modes of masks and how to use mask opacity and other effects on masks. We're also going to work with mats. We're going to use track and luma mats. We're going to use stencils and silhouettes, and we're going to go over animating all those different kinds of mats. And finally, I'll be showing you how to render your project so that you have a little video at the end of the day. So let's get started. There are two tools for creating masks, and we're going to start by bringing the footage down into our, let me just find the right one. Bringing the footage down into our timeline. Oop, write it twice. Oops. So here I have a shot of this student walking into the elevator, or at least in this case waiting for the elevator. And you see I have a bunch more here. If you remember from our last lesson, you can do a lot with the in and out points of each clip. And so to draw a mask, we want to make sure anytime we're drawing a mask that we have the layer selected here in the layer panel. And then we go up here to the shape, in this case the rectangle tool, though sometimes you've got rounded rectangles, ellipses, polygons, and stars. I'll go over each of those. I'll start with rectangle though. You click that, and then you click and you drag. And you see the mask is actually already going into effect. You see the outline in green, and then the image that it actually is masking is the only bit that shines through the black. So when you're done drawing the mask, you release it and it's done. But while you're drawing the mask, there's a few different things you can do. One is you can hold shift, and that'll keep your mask a square, or if you're using a rounded tool, it'll keep it a circle. Keeps it 1 to 1. If you press spacebar, you can move it around. So if you didn't like where you pressed that first point, you can always fix that. If you press the command key, that changes so that the first point you clicked is actually the middle of the mask as opposed to the top left corner. And that's how you draw a mask. There's also a number of other shapes that you can use. We've got the rounded rectangle tool, which has rounded edges. We've got the ellipse tool, which is a circle or an ellipse. And then we've got some advanced shapes, both the polygon tool, which will draw a polygon, and you'll see that here. I'll show you how to do this in a moment. Oops. So it defaults to drawing a polygon like that one, sorry. if you don't like using a oops, what have I done here? Sorry, guys. So when you draw the polygon, it defaults to pentagon, but you can also change the shape by pressing the left and right arrow keys. Those kind of squish the lines outwards into interesting shapes like that, and it even will go across itself. If you press it very far to the left, it actually goes past the straight line and starts going in on itself, even so much as twisting. You can also press the up and down arrow keys. These are actually going to add and remove sides from your mask. So you see I've got hexagon, an octagon, or no, this is an octagon, that's a 7-gon, 9, 10, 11, whatever, and it goes all the way up until it's virtually a circle again. You can add that many sides. You can also draw stars. And stars work a lot of the same way. If you press the up and down arrow key, you add points to it. And if you press the left and right, you squish it in and out. So you can make a lot of really interesting shapes with the mask shapes. Also, I may have done this a couple times, if you want to make a mask that is exactly the same size as your full frame, such as a rectangle mask to cover the whole thing, you just double click, and you see it's built a mask around the whole outside of it. If you do that with a round one, you'll see it cuts off the edges. But it still gets the ellipse to every side. So I'm going to go back and just draw a normal circle mask. A normal rectangle mask. And then we're going to talk about editing the shape of the mask. So there's a couple different ways to do it. The first way is to, once you've put down the mask tool and gotten back to your selection tool, double-clicking on the edge of the mask. And you see it's added all these little points, and it's kind of changed the outline a little bit. So now we've got some pretty normal transform controls. And so we can pull it up and down. We can click when there's a round shape and rotate it. Pull it by its corner, in and out, up and down, etc. You can also, if you're not in the free transform mode, as that's called, you can also edit separate vertices of the shape. So you see right here, I clicked on this one in the middle. Oops. Right now I'm just clicking on the outside left one, the outside right, etc. And that allows you to change each of those. These also have these also can have Bezier handles like you've seen before, and I'll go into that more in a minute. One thing to know when you're drawing masks is maybe you have a couple different masks to draw. But the issue is, if you want to draw a second mask on this picture, say you wanted to draw a mask where the elevator is, you'd kind of have to guess, right? Oops. You see that's what happens when you don't select the layer you want to draw the mask on. You end up just drawing a rectangle. So select the layer, draw the mask. So I did a pretty good job, but what if I wanted to be really precise? Well, one thing you can do is you can actually double-click your layer, going into the Layer tab up here. And on View Masks, you can unclick Render. So this will still show you the mask and where it is, but also allow you to draw another mask and see where that is. You see I can draw any number of masks. So I'm going to close the Layer panel and go back to our composition. So the next thing we're going to be looking at is different parameters of a mask. So the first one we'll talk about is right here. I've opened my mask menu down here. And the first one is this add. I'll talk a little more about what each of these does later, but the basics are add is going to add what's inside the mask into the composition, or the opposite of which is it is subtracting everything else away. So it's a window that allows you to see just this bit of the composition. None is going to turn it off. You also have inverted. This is going to do the opposite of add. So you see it shows the whole image, but the mask is a cut through. And if there was a layer below this layer, you would see it right here. Subtract does the same thing. And I'll go over intersect and lighten, darken, and difference a little later in this lesson. So I'm going to put it back to add for now. The next mask parameter you see here is mask path. So mask path is the shape of the mask. If you click the word shape, you open up this little dialog box, and that's going to allow you to change a few different things about the mask, including the pixel point at which all the areas of the bounding box are. So I've dragged them out a little, and you see I've moved it. Doesn't change the size, just moves it. The other thing mask shape is good for is when you're actually animating masks, which I'll get to in a minute. This is the spot you'll click and use the keyframe and the stopwatch to choose if you want to have a mask change its shape or its angle live. The next parameter down is the feather. So the mask feather is the edge of the mask, and whether it's soft and feathered, like this, or if it's very hard, like the box. If you ever want to see your feather, but you're having a little trouble because of the line of the mask, you can go to this spot right here, toggle mask and shape path visibility, click that, and it's going to turn off the actual little neon colored box and allow you to really see what you're working with when you're moving pixels around. Careful with feather, because if you go too far, you actually start to lose the opacity of the middle of your image. I'm going to turn my bounding boxes back on. The next option is mask opacity. It's exactly what it sounds like. It'll turn up and down the opacity of the mask. And finally, mask expansion. Mask expansion is going to expand the mask exactly as it is, but let it allow it to become wider or smaller. Notice, though, that the mask's its bounding box does not actually change. So now let's talk about animating masks. You can animate masks just the same way you can animate anything else. You're going to turn on the stopwatch for a mask's parameters. You're going to pull to another point in time where you want the animation to have changed, and you're going to change what it looks like. So I'm going to have it add quite a bit of feather, maybe turn the opacity down a little, but expand it to get bigger. And I'm going to move it because the person who the mask is supposed to be following walked out of frame. So I'm going to move it over here. And you see that it built a new keyframe for each of those parameters. So let's watch it back. So you see our actor moved a little farther than our mask moved, or a little faster and got a little farther. But for the most part, it's kind of a cool effect that I've made, as if the light is only highlighting her. I'm going to delete those keyframes because I don't need them. And we're going to move on. So one small thing that is really helpful to have masks for is actually creating vignettes. So we're going to pull a new image into our sequence for now. I'm just going to make this one disappear for the moment. I'm going to use this one of the character actually at the elevator door. So I want to create a vignette. And a vignette is actually most easily created using a mask. So the easiest way to do it is to double-click the rectangle up here, just like I showed you before. And that's going to make a mask the exact size and shape of our frame. Then, I've done this the opposite of the way I meant to do it. So the easiest way to create a mask is to go to Layer, New, Solid, and you're going to make a solid. That's the same size as your composition. You can use Make Comp Size to do that. And then you can set a color. I think black is going to make the most sense, though sometimes vignettes are not black. I hit OK, and that puts a solid black layer on top of my video layer. It's the exact size of frame. Now, I'm going to double-click the rectangle to apply a mask to it. And I'm going to click the inverted box to invert that mask. And you see I've basically disappeared the whole thing because the entire layer is being masked out and it's inverted, so it's being taken away. But I'm going to now add some of it back in. So if I go into Mask, Mask 1, and then I go to Mask Feather and turn that up, you notice that you start to get some of the black creeping in from the sides of the frame. And you can make it very severe or a little less severe. But you see you get these nice vignetted corners that help draw the focus into the center of your frame. So that's how you create a vignette, using a mask. The next technique I wanted to show you, delete these for now, oops, is how to do your own masking, how to draw a custom mask. So I'm going to get this shot, this wider shot of the outside of Cornerstone, and add that in. So a custom mask is created using the pen tool. So just like any other mask, you still need to be selected on your layer. But now you can go up to this pen tool right here, the command for which is G. And when you press G, you get the little pen tool out. And the way to use the pen tool is you click, and you click, and you click, and you're putting each vertex on a shape. And so this is a mask I'm creating right here. To complete it, you have to make sure you meet at the point you started at, and that this little funny circle appears, the donut with the hole in the middle of it. Click that, and your mask is complete. And you see it's the exact same shape I drew, and it's an addition mask in this case. When you're working with the pen tool, there's a few other things you can do when you're using it. You can add another vertex along the side by hovering over the edge with the pen tool and waiting for the little plus sign to appear. And you see that adds a new vertex. You can click and move that around. But say you don't want that anymore. Well, if you press the Command key, you'll get a minus. And when you click that, it disappears. The other thing you can do is if you click and drag on these, oops, what have I done here? The other thing you can do is if you hover over the vertex with the Alt or Option key, you get this funny triangle arrow. This is the Convert Vertex tool. And when you click on this, it's going to take it from a square corner to a Bezier handle, or a vertex with a Bezier handle. And you see now I can really start to manipulate the shape. Now say you are drawing away a new mask, and you stop and you're editing it. Maybe you add a new vertex here. Maybe you decide to change this one to a Bezier, and you're working with this one. But then you realize you really want to make sure the end of your mask is completed because you never finished it. So to do that, you just have to make sure that the last point you click on is the end point of your current mask. Click on that, and then you can start drawing again. So let's practice this. I'm going to remove these two masks. And now I'm going to practice this technique by tracing the roof line of Cornerstone. So when you're working with freeform masking, there's a couple other tools. The Zoom tool, which is accessed by Z, and that zooms you in, or if you hold Alt, it zooms you out. There's also the Hand tool, which you can get by pressing and holding spacebar. That allows you to click and move your image around, and then it reverts you back to whatever tool you were using. So I like to zoom way in so I can see the detail I'm working with. I'm actually going to put the first mask point outside the frame, then the second one right on the edge here, and then we're going to start on our way in, just tracing the roof line of Cornerstone. You see I press the space bar to move my image, and I get back my pen tool and I can keep going. Oops. Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. I'm going to trace out this tree a little bit because it would be a little weird to have it cut off. And then you just have to make sure you complete your mask. So sometimes it's handy to zoom out far enough that you can go outside the box, that is your composition, and complete your mask. Now you see, I've traced the outside of Cornerstone and completed the mask. However, I've actually created an add mask that's adding the sky in because I brought these lines up and over. If I brought them down below, it would have been fine. It's not a big deal though, because I can just press inverted and switch it this way. So now the sky is blacked out, but the mask below, or the picture below, is visible. This allows you to do some really interesting things. So if you get the 3D spiral galaxy animation out, and you bring this into your composition and put it just below your Cornerstone layer, and it starts a little small, so let's grab these handles and make it quite a bit bigger. And you see that this exists just behind the Cornerstone layer, which I cut out. And this already looks pretty good. You could probably spend some time doing a slightly better job of masking Cornerstone. You can also add just a little bit of a feather, not too much though. You see that's too much. Just a very small amount of feather, and that might help the look a little bit as well. And there you have it. You've masked two images together. So now I wanted to show you the different kinds of mask modes. I talked earlier about addition and subtraction masks, but there's a few other kinds I wanted to show you. So on the image you already have here, let's add another mask, and let's just draw it right across here. And you see that in the area where this mask overlapped the other one, it actually removed the background. So now we can start working with these two masks. So the next option for mask 2 is to do a subtract mask, and you see how that interacts with mask 1. It actually removes what mask 1 was revealing and just shows the sky through. We can also use an intersect mask. This mask makes the only thing that appears between the two masks, which makes the only thing that is allowed through the area that is the intersection, or what appears between the two masks. You can also do the opposite of this with what's called difference. You see difference is just going to give you, the area that's not in between, and the area that is shared by the two masks is removed. So those are different kinds of mask modes. You can also use effects with masks. And there's some really interesting effects that you can use. Any effect will work with a mask. You see if I go to my effects and presets, and I pick out a blur, for example, we'll just do a fast blur and apply it to the Cornerstone layer. And notice when I add this blur, it's just going to blur Cornerstone itself. It doesn't blur anything that's in the area that I've masked out and replaced with the sky. You can also add the blur instead of to there, but to the other layer that's shining through. And you see it only works out there. It doesn't work on the Cornerstone layer. Other interesting effects that you can do are actually effects that use the shape or the path of the mask for their effect. So one I think is really cool is called Scribble. Let's add Scribble. What Scribble does is it uses the mask and it fills it in with a kind of scribble. So you can see Scribble, single mask, mask 1, you can tell it which mask to work on, and then fill type is inside. There's a couple other ones though. Centered edge, which centers it along the line, inside edge, which is on the inside of the mask, outside is on the outside, but still along the line, and then the left edges of the mask and the right edges of the mask. So let's stick with centered edge for now, because I think that's really cool. You can change the color. Let's try red. You can make it more or less opaque. You can change the angle that this scribble is happening at, even the stroke width, making it thicker or thinner. And then there's a lot of options here under stroke options. You can make it more curvy. with some variation in the curves, maybe a little more space between the curves, but some variation there as well because you don't want it to look too perfect and even. You can do path overlap, which makes it overlap the path a little more but not be as tight to it, and even variation in that. Then if you have start and end set, this is actually going to choose a percentage point of how much it will use. And I'll show you why this is important in just a moment. However, you notice when I did this, I lost the image below. And say you wanted to keep the image below. So you come down here to composite, and you go to, instead of on transparent, you can do on original image, or you can do reveal visual original image, which doesn't really work with this, but it's actually, these lines are showing Cornerstone just through them if you looked through them, but they're not big enough. So let's do on original image. Let's turn off our mask path. Now, Scribble is really cool because you can actually animate the scribble and have it change over time. So I'm going to set a start point for our scribble at 100%. And this might sound counterintuitive, but just bear with me. So I set that keyframe, and I'm going to drag to the end. I'm going to set our start to 0%. Oops. And now you can watch what happens. And you can see that as you've added the scribble effect, it can make a lot of differences how it works, but there's a lot of really interesting things you'd be able to do with it, where it could chase along the path, or you could highlight a certain area. So there's a lot you can do with using masks and effects together, and specifically using some mask effects that actually follow mask paths. So I'm going to delete scribble. So the other thing I wanted to show you how to do today was matting. And matting is actually different than masking, and I'll explain why. Track mats are a pair of layers that work together where the shape of the layer on top is used as a transparency for the background to show through. So this is different from a mask in the case that a mask is a layer showing through a mask, but it's showing through itself. It's not showing through another layer. And I'll show you what I mean. So let's make sure we have an interesting matte transparency we can put under it. So if you go to your project, you can go get Big Fire, which looks like this. Let's import Big Fire in here. And let's make it a lot bigger. It's very small. So I'm going to make it almost as big as the screen, if I can. Run out of space there. There we go. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn the track matting on. So if you don't see this on your screen, come down here and click Expand or Collapse the Transfer Control Panes, or click Toggle Switches and Modes. And you'll see this will give you track matting. Track matte. It also brings up the blending modes, which we talked about last week. Now we're going to turn the track matte on for the second layer down, which is a little confusing, but we're actually telling the second layer to use the first layer as a track matte. So we'll click Track Matte, and you'll see there's 4 options here. Alpha, Alpha Inverted, Luma, and Luma Inverted, and then it tells you the layer it's going to use as the matte. So in this case, Big Fire. So the one we want in this case is an Alpha Matte. And when you click it, you'll see, oops, let's turn off our 3D spiral for now. It's not going to help us out. So now you'll see that the fire has been turned into a track matte. And when I press play, the parts of the Cornerstone image that you're actually seeing are the parts that are shining through the fire. And that creates a really interesting effect. You also have Alpha Inverted Matte, which is the opposite. This is using the whites as opposed to the blacks of the fire image. And then you also have Luma Mattes, which I'll get into now. So let's delete our Big Fire for the moment. Put Cornerstone back the way it is. Luma mats, I think, are really good for text. In case you have text that does not already have an alpha channel to remove, you can draw text, and making sure it's white text, so we've got text now, and now we can use this text as a Luma mat. So we've got our white text. We go to the same track mat option, and this time we use Luma mat, making sure it's white text. And you see, that didn't work. So we actually need to do the Luma inverted. Huh, why is this not working? Okay, well, it's working now. Not sure why it wasn't working before. But you see that I've made the text a Luma mat that allows Cornerstone to shine through from the background. The Luma inverted mat is the opposite. It makes the text as a black layer shining through Cornerstone. The other kind of mat is actually not a mat at all, but it's called a stencil, or a silhouette. So a stencil works very much in the same way as a mat, but it's a little bit different. The difference between a stencil and a mat is the difference that you actually saw earlier when I accidentally had my spiral galaxy on in the background. So I'm going to bring the fire back, make it real nice and big. And now what I'm going to do to the fire is, instead of using a track mat like I did before, I'm going to go to my blending modes. And in this case, you actually want to put the mat, or in this case the mode, on the layer that is on top. You go to blending modes and you go to stencil alpha, or silhouette alpha, but we'll start with stencil alpha. When you click stencil alpha, you see that it does the exact same thing it did before. The difference between this and a track mat, I will show you. Let's put the stencil back to normal, and let's put the alpha mat on. When you alpha mat this, you notice that the bottom layer shines through regardless and is not affected by the fire's mat. If you want to have your mat layer affect all the layers below it, you want to use the mode stencil alpha. And you see that shines down through. Oops, it's not working again. Hang on a moment here, guys. Normal stencil alpha. Oh, I clicked on the wrong one. Sorry. Okay, ready? Normal stencil alpha. And you see that shines through not just the cornerstone layers, not just the one it's letting through, but also the sort of 3D spiral layer in the background. This also holds true when you're using, I'll show you, there's also silhouette alphas. And this is the opposite, just like the inverted was the opposite with track mats. So we'll remove our fire, bring our white text back, and you can do the same thing. There's a stencil luma and a silhouette luma option. So we'll do stencil luma, and you see this shines through everything, including the background, the 3D spiral, and silhouette luma does the same as well. Finally, I'm going to show you how to render your final footage. So say this is your finished product. It's a little weird. And I guess we tilted the camera down there. So I'm going to set a point here that we don't want to import farther than. So if you only want to export a certain section of your composition, you can use this little guy. And these are kind of in and out points for export or for RAM previewing. So I'm going to bring that to there. And I've just got this little area that you see in gray. I'm going to go to File, Export, and you see, oh, where's my normal export option? It's actually in Add to Render Queue. I'm going to click that. And it's going to open down here. And this will have the name of your composition. And then we've got our settings. So the first one is Render Settings, Best Settings. This should all stay like this. There are some reasons for it to be different, but for now, this should all stay like this. Output module, you can click on where it says lossless, and here you can choose the different formats you want to output in. So there's all these formats here. I prefer QuickTime, but there's of course reasons to use any number of things. Then under format options, you can choose different video codecs. So we like to use Apple ProRes 422 here in the Film and Media department. It's a very high-res codec, but it's still small enough to be able to be worked with. Hit OK. The rest of this is good. You want your channels to be RGB, millions of colors, pre-multiplied. There's reasons to change these as well, but in this case, not relevant. Hit OK, and the last thing you do is you choose your output to spot. Here you can click and it opens a Finder window. You can rename it, whatever you want to rename it, and then you hit Save. And when you're all done, you're going to hit this button that says Render. And it's going to start rendering. And you can follow it along here, and it'll make a nice, pleasant sound when it's done. And it makes this nice, pleasant sound. And now you can watch your QuickTime video wherever it stored it on your computer or hard drive. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching.